It's time for another episode of Let's Talk Business, featuring interviews with South Carolina business executives, community leaders, and government dignitaries. Let's Talk Business is a truly one-of-a-kind business-to-business talk show. And now, here's your host, longtime South Carolina business publisher, Rick Jenkins.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Business South Carolina. I'm your host, Rick Jenkins, and whether you are joining us today and watching a video on our YouTube channel, or maybe you have downloaded this as a podcast on one of the platforms, Google or Spotify or Apple, regardless of how you found us, I am certainly glad you did. Appreciate you tuning in. We got a good show for you today. We're going to be talking to three executives. The first one is John Uprichard. John is the CEO at FGP, or Find Great People. I believe everyone knows who FGP is. They are a staffing firm, executive search firm, and a consulting firm. They provide HR consulting and leadership coaching to a number of people. They have offices in Charleston and Columbia. They're headquartered in Greenville, and they've even got an office in Music City, Nashville, Tennessee. John came to FGP in, I believe it was 2001. He's been there about 2 decades, and in that time that John has been there, FGP revenue has gone up 3,000%. For those of you who don't know, that's a good number. They've also been named one of the best places to work in South Carolina 11 times, so John and his staff are certainly doing something right. We'll talk to John. We'll also talk to Matt Caldwell. Matt is the market president for Bon Secours Health System. He joined them in 2016. Bon Secours is a not-for-profit Catholic health system, and they have 2 hospitals in Greenville, and you probably know where they both are. One of them is St. Francis downtown, and one of them is St. Francis East Side. Matt, before he came to Greenville, was in Texas, and he was in Tennessee. He was in Texas for quite some time, got a degree there. I look forward to seeing what he thinks the differences are between Texas and Greenville. And last but certainly not least, I'll be talking to Dr. Nika White. Nika is the president and CEO of Nika White Consulting, and she is an international authority on DEI measures, diversity and equality and inclusion. And she and I are going to have a long-ranging, far-reaching conversation on DEI. She's also the best-selling author of a few books. You know, DEI efforts have long been among the cornerstones by which a strong company culture is built. They exist to ensure that each company has diverse talent and is well represented, and that people are held accountable. And DEI practices are meant to enable equality and opportunity, to promote openness, and to fight bias and discrimination. However, DEI efforts are increasingly becoming part of a national political debate, and that's been going on for a few years now, and it's just kind of becoming more challenging in the workplace. And so Nika and I are going to have that conversation and just kind of talk that out and see where that goes. So it's going to be an interesting conversation. You won't want to miss that. Anyway, we'll be back to talk to John and Matt and Nika. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in about 30 seconds.
I bet you want a website that drums up business. You see, every business wants to have an effective online presence that helps their business grow. At Drum Creative, we guide you through our process that will drive results by clarifying your message with a beautiful design that's strategically optimized for search. Visit our website at drumcreative.com and let us help you drum up business by designing a website that speaks to your audience and delivers results.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Business, and I am your host, Rick Jenkins. It's good to see you. And our first guest today is John Uprichard. John is the CEO and the president at FGP. You know them as Find Great People, probably. FGP, as I told you at the top of the show, they are an executive search firm, a staffing firm, and they also offer consulting services such as HR and leadership coaching as well. They have offices headquartered here in Greenville, but have offices in Columbia and Charleston, even in Music City, Nashville, Tennessee. They got presence over there. You know, FGP started as Phillips International back in 1982, and at that time, what is FGP now, dealt largely with apparel in the textile industry, which, as we all know, is what at least the upstate of South Carolina was built on for many years. But if you fast forward a decade and you go into 1992, and BMW comes to town, right? And all of a sudden we start transitioning from a textile type of economy in South Carolina to one of advanced manufacturing. You go forward another decade, and this guy comes to town, and his name is John Uprichard, as I said, and he became the CEO in 2002, rebranded Phillips International to FGP in 2003, and since that time, he's done some good work. Revenues at FGP up 3,000% in the last couple decades. I didn't say 300%, I said 3,000%. They've even won one of the best places to work in South Carolina 11 times. Folks, John Uprichard, welcome, man.
Thank you, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here.
I hope I said all that right. Did I get it right?
You did.
Okay, because a lot of things happened there over the last couple decades. We were talking right before we came on the air about you arriving at FGP in that phase. I moved to Greenville in the early 2000s. We were talking about how much Greenville has changed.
Yeah, Greenville, it really is amazing if you think about back in 2002 when we bought Phillips International. And I think about, where Greenville was back then and where it is today. So our company has benefited from a lot of the growth in our region. But I would tell you, as I think back to our company back in 2002 today versus where it is today, the one thing that has stayed consistent is great people. And we really believe that it takes great people to build great companies, and that starts with us. What compelled us to buy Phillips International back in 2002 was really the core of the company, which was people. And I think back to our journey since then. Some of the people that were with Phillips back in 2002, they're still with us today and have taken on even more meaningful roles within the organization.
You had to have quite the vision in 2002 to go to work for a company that was entrenched in the textile industry as it was beginning to fade away in South Carolina.
I wish I could tell you that I had this amazing vision. I think a few things were, really important in helping us drive our growth. One was our rebrand. I think that was a big part of it.
Now rebrand to FGP.
Yeah, rebrand to FGP. That was important. Second is we re-engineered our core business, which was executive search. And then as an organization, we've always been very opportunistic. And we had some clients who really encouraged us. And I think encouragement is a kind word, sort of said, hey, we want you to do this, which this was staffing at the time. And so all of a sudden, what we try to do is we just sort of jump in and figure it out. Right. Sometimes people say, we'll jump out of the plane and figure how to operate the chute on the way down. And we're a little bit more deliberate and methodical than that, but we got into staffing and that allowed us to really offer more than just executive search to our clients and offer, more of a talent solution. So I think that has been a big part of our growth. The amazing people that we have at our company has been, I would say, the biggest part of our success. For me personally, the other thing that I've really been blessed with, I have a great partner with T. Hooper, and T has a lot of success with scaling and growing companies in multiple industries. So he's been a great mentor and visionary guide along the way as FGP has grown.
Right. Before we get into more about your industry, tell me about you. Where are you from?
So I'm originally from Tampa, Florida.
Okay.
And I'm a huge Buccaneers fan. The Buccaneers did not do well last night.
They got beat last night.
They did not do well on Monday Night Football.
Yeah.
And but I came to South Carolina as a trailing spouse. So I was in the Navy, and this was back in 1999. My wife, Chris, we moved to Greenville for her career. She's a children's dentist. She still practices today. And at the time, we had we had one child, our oldest son, Matthew. I think he was maybe like a little bit over a year old. And I had to do my last 8 months in the military in the Persian Gulf. Came back to Greenville. Chris was part of her practice, Greenville Pediatric Dentistry. And I came back to Greenville and I was looking for a job. You don't really find recruiting. Recruiting sort of finds you. And, and I went to go work for a large international staffing company. And I honestly, at the time, really didn't even know what staffing and recruiting was. They just seemed to they were a publicly traded company. They had the best benefits. And
Robert Half?
Yeah, Robert Half. And it offered some stability. And I would tell you, my time at Robert Half was great because it's sort of a sink or swim. They sort of throw you in the pool and start and say, hey, learn the business. And I learned a lot in the 2 years that I was there.
But until that time, no exposure whatsoever to the industry.
No exposure to the industry, and really no exposure to really being an entrepreneur and running businesses.
Right.
I think the one thing that the military teaches you to do, and I learned this when I was 22 years old and I was sent overseas to lead a personnel detachment of 35 people. I was the youngest person. And I quickly learned that you get results, with and through people, and it's more about them, and you're here to work for them versus they're here to work for you. Right. And I think that's the one thing that I learned in the military that I think transcends anything that you do when you're in a leadership management role.
So you came to Greenville, did you say in 99?
In 99.
So only 3 years from the time you came to Greenville and joined Robert Half to the time you decided to invest in your own staffing agency. You learned an entire industry in a few years and rolled the dice and went with it.
Yeah, I would say I learned a lot, but I think
you never stop learning.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, and I think
right.
Listen. I think you learn through experience. You learn through mistakes, but I think you learn a lot based upon the people that you have around you. And I was really fortunate to have a lot of great people around me, from partners to people that were part of Phillips when we bought the company. And I think as when I look back with FGP since 2003, you learn to be agile. And I think that's, we're very agile as a company. And I think I've also had to learn to be agile as a leader and to really learn, it's very different running a company of 25 people versus today running a company of 100 plus people in 4 locations. And what is my role as our CEO? But I would say probably more importantly, what is not my role as the CEO of our company?
Right. Where not to stick your nose sometime?
Exactly.
Where to let those folks do it. I pay you to do it, you do it, right?
Yeah,
I understand. You're talking about agility, the importance of agility, and I have a feeling that it was extremely important in your industry to be agile. In March of 2020, when this thing called COVID hit, and you probably, as we all did, had to do that word that came into our lexicon back then, pivot, and you probably had to learn a lot of things and pivot in different ways. What did COVID do to you in 2020? What happened?
Yeah, so I think I think a lot of times when you're in crisis, there's something called Cantor's Law, which is in the middle of the crisis, everything seems like a failure, and everything really seems like it's on fire. And whether it's COVID or whether it's recession, we really look at those as an opportunity. And I think it's an opportunity to demonstrate sound leadership. It's an opportunity to lead your team through crisis. But with COVID, once we sort of figured out what was going on with the pandemic, we got people home, and the economy started to open back up. We looked at that as really an opportunity for gains. And I think what we did was we leveraged the financial strength of our company, and we made a lot of great experienced hires, and it allowed us time to really work on our business. And it allowed us time to sort of optimize what we were doing. it also allowed us time to sort of lay out more of a long-term growth plan. And it also allowed us to do some training and development with people that we hadn't done before. So during COVID for us actually was a time to get stronger, to pick up some experienced hires, because the one thing that we knew is that when things did turn, we needed to be prepared for accelerated growth, which is what we experienced, coming out of COVID.
Right. COVID was a roller coaster for a lot of industries. And of course, because it was a roller coaster for a lot of different industries, it's a roller coaster for a staffing agency because you deal with so many different industries. Okay, so you're up and down. And now you fast forward a few years, we still have some remnants of COVID out there. And one of the things that comes to mind is, remote work, hybrid work that kind of became popular during that time, and it still exists in a variety of formats. What does that look like today?
Yeah. So I think the one thing that COVID has taught all of us, whether it's workforce, interest rates, whatever it is that the puck is going to move really fast. And when it does, you have to recognize that the puck has moved, and you gotta quickly get to where the puck is and in front of it. I think the other thing too that we've seen is, if you look back to whether it's recessionary periods, patterns in the past from an industry standpoint are not relevant to where we are today. And who would have ever thought that you would have low unemployment, high interest rates, and an inverted yield curve, and we wouldn't be in a recession. So, and the thing that people have to be mindful of as leaders is great leaders typically, make a lot of decisions based upon past experiences. There's something called pattern recognition, and so we recognize things from the past. We're like, hey, this happened to us 5 years ago. Well, 5 years ago isn't today. So how is today different? And I think the one thing that COVID has taught everyone is that things are going to be different. And I think people are still trying to figure out what is going to be some of our sort of workplace norms, our economic norms moving forward.
When this episode airs, it will be the first week of Q4. So we are fast approaching, and again, we'll be in Q4 when this comes out. So as we are in Q4 of 2023, what hiring managers, what do they need to know? People looking for a job, what do they need to know? I mean, what if you could provide some advice to those folks?
Yeah. So I would say probably the most important thing is readiness. And coming out of COVID, you had the Great Resignation. You had a lot of people leaving. You had wage escalation in the market. Then you had things pivot very quickly to where people were all of a sudden, people were saying, is this the Great Retention? And people are staying. But I think it gets back to what I was talking about, is that the puck's going to move. And I think you have to have readiness for whether you're going to have people leave. I think you have to have readiness for what our hiring plan is going to be around growth. And I think you also have to have readiness as it relates to, do we have the employment brand that, is really going to attract the kind of people that we want? And does our employment brand really appropriately, I think, paint the picture of who we are as an employer, the type of culture that we have, and does it pull people in?
There was a time, you mentioned the Great Resignation, there was a time at that point, the employees had all the leverage in that employee-employer relationship, right? They had the leverage, but it has circled back, right? I mean, maybe not completely back, because there's still a demand for hybrid, and if I can't do this, I'm not going to do that kind of deal. But where do we stand with that?
Yeah, so I think companies are starting to, shape more of a long-term path forward, where some companies were remote, they're bringing people back in. Some companies are moving more to, hybrid, and you also have companies before that were saying, hey, you know what? Because of the Great Resignation and it being a candidate-driven market, they were somewhat fearful. We don't want to disrupt our workforce model and lose a lot of people. Today, I think companies are now, with some of the shift in market conditions, are saying, hey, you know what, we're going to go back to a hybrid. Or we have some clients that are we see them bringing people back in, 5 days a week. And I think they're making more long-term decisions with their workforce model versus decisions based upon sort of the short-term and current conditions.
Well, it's not a one-size-fits-all
That's right.
type of circumstance.
Yeah.
Right. Why don't you give some advice to companies as they're looking for the best talent that they can get? There are two things I always think about. One is attracting talent and getting the best talent, but just as importantly, probably more importantly, is retaining the best talent that you have and not letting it go elsewhere.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that are important that get overlooked. One is environment and culture. And I'll give you an example. So, let's say you're a high growth, entrepreneurial, let's say small to medium sized business that has 25 to maybe 35 employees. It's probably a fun culture. It's a fast pace. People wear a lot of different hats. And so if we're interviewing a candidate and they're coming from a larger organization, maybe an organization that has 300 employees, that still doesn't seem like a larger organization. The reality is a 300-person organization has a different environment, different resources, different infrastructure than a company that has 25, 30 people. And I think what happens sometimes as relates to finding and keeping the talent is I sort of correlate it back to, you see this a lot in professional sports. You'll have an athlete go from one organization to another. They're incredibly successful at one sports team. They go to another organization, same position, and they're not successful. Why? Environment and coaching. Right. So I think sometimes environment gets overlooked, and we don't ask enough questions in the interview about the environment that they're coming from, the resources that they have, the infrastructure, and is that environment, if they've been successful, if let's say they've been in that environment for 5-7 years, they've been promoted twice, well, that's an indicator of success. And so is our environment similar? Because that's the type of environment that they're going to thrive in.
Yeah, using that same analogy as football, it works the other way around too in terms of leadership, because you see all the time in football, a coach, all of a sudden, he's a Super Bowl winning coach, and now all of a sudden he can't win, right? He's with a new team. It's not because he's not a good coach anymore, but sometimes it's circumstances, right? Sometimes it's just the situation they're in. So sticking with leadership for a second, you all provide leadership coaching. That's one of the services that you provide. What does that look like for FGP?
So we actually do a lot of executive coaching, and we do that with individual leaders. We also do a lot of work with leadership teams and helping them with shared leadership models. We also help them around, maybe where there might be specific gaps. It could be communication, collaboration. And then we also do a lot of advisory work. And that advisory work can start at the board level. It can be with leadership teams. It could also, be with mid-management. The one thing that I always tell folks, the strength of leadership in an organization, a lot of times people think it's at the top. And it's not. And I use FGP as an example. The strength of leadership at FGP is not me. The strength of leadership it's the people in the middle of the organization that are close to the action. Those are what we refer to as linchpin positions. Mm-hmm. You pull a linchpin out, the wheel falls apart. The mid-level management, the people who are leading the day-to-day that are close to the action, that's the strength of leadership in an organization.
Sticking with that for a second, it's important for leaders to be able to report down just as leaders have to report up, right? And I think that's what you're getting at is these people in mid-level management positions, you report to them in a way, right? As the CEO, as the boss, you report to those folks in a way.
Absolutely. I think, the traditional organizational sort of hierarchy is many times it's a pyramid with executive leaders on top. And I think today, and I think COVID really taught us is, and with the workforce models that we have today, and also I would say probably most importantly, every company today is a multi-generational company. And as a result of all that, you have to invert the pyramid. So if you think about the top of the pyramid needs to be the employees that are closest to the customer, and the leaders that are in the middle of the organization, really the strength of the organization and driving the organization. And they're really the ones that have to help shape the decisions of the organizations versus, traditionally you would have executive leadership sit in a conference room and they would make decisions. And it doesn't mean that the decisions that they made were wrong, but they might not be as informed because, the people that are close to the action aren't in that conference room with those executive leaders.
Right. And leading by example, right? Pretty important. I would imagine that FGP over the last 2 decades is not nearly as successful as it had, and at least in terms of revenue growth that we discussed, if someone like you and an executive team doesn't get out there and lead by example.
Yeah. So I think leadership by example is the most powerful form of leadership. I think it starts, number one, with visibility. And leadership by example is it's really about your actions, of course. It is also about your habits, and then it's also about your attitudes as well. But I would say probably the most important thing with leadership by example is consistency. And if you think about what people want from leaders, is they want consistency and predictability, and sort of how they experience them as leaders. And when there is inconsistency in how they lead by example, when there's inconsistency in how they experience them as a leader, you're now giving them reasons not to trust. You're giving them reasons to maybe want to leave.
Right. One of the things that I have always wanted from my bosses over the years is good communication skills. Communicating is extremely important. You can say what you think you mean, and the folks you're saying it to might not necessarily, they go away with a whole different idea of what that conversation was just about. So if I'm making a list of the most important things, I want my bosses to be able to communicate well, and I feel that I need to as well. How about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's 3 critical points when it comes to, really having, great organizational communication. And I would say, I think sort of, the first one is the lens of the receiver. Many times as a leader, you communicate based upon your lens. And maybe maybe it's written communication, or you're talking to a group and maybe you look at an email and you think, gosh, this seems great. Well, it's really not about your lens as the leader, it's about the lens of the receiver. Does it connect with them? I think that is really important. 2 is effective versus efficient. We live in this technology-enabled world, and as a result, technology makes us focus more on efficient communication. I mean, we can send an email out to 100 plus people in 10, 15 minutes, but that doesn't mean it's effective communication. Sometimes, depending upon the context of the message, it might be better for us to slow down. Right. And actually do more one-on-one or small group communication. So effective versus efficient is something that I think you always have to come back to and really prioritize effectiveness over efficiency. And then I would say, I think the third thing around communication is different mediums. And, I think it could be video, company meetings, small group communication, email, text. It's really not one thing, one communication strategy. Your communication strategy has to really encompass all those different mediums. And I think you have to use all of them because people process communication differently. So if you use all of them, then you're going to create that connectivity across your entire workforce.
That's good stuff. We've lost the one-on-one, haven't we, in some regards?
Yes, you have.
Unfortunately. Folks, that is John Uprichard. He is the CEO and the president at FGP, or Find Great People. But we're not done yet, so don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back after a short commercial break with our next guest. See you in a minute.
Hey, Rick. For the financial tip of the week this week, we're going to be talking about living abroad and moving abroad permanently. Say you want to retire and live in a foreign country. There's some things you need to know. Number one, Medicare will not pay in a foreign country if you're there for an extended period. Number two, Social Security will deposit into a bank in a foreign country, but only in those countries that they designate as safe. Number three, long-term care policies don't necessarily pay in foreign countries. Check the policy to see what it says. And number four, what does it take to actually live in a foreign country? My wife and I are currently looking at this because we are going to move to France when we retire. Our beautiful daughter lives here in the south of France. We are in Nice. And we have to find out what it takes to get a long stay visa and to qualify to be part of their medical system in France. You need to find out the same thing no matter what country you're going to live in. Those are your financial tips of the week. Jeff Froman, Ameriprise Financial. Back to you, Rick.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Business South Carolina. I'm your host, Rick Jenkins, and I appreciate you joining us, whether you are watching us on YouTube, checking out our videos there, or maybe you have downloaded our podcast on Apple or Spotify or Google. Regardless of how you are with us today, I'm glad you found us. We're going to have a good conversation now. We're going to be talking about DEI, workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, or again, DEI. They have long been the cornerstones, among the cornerstones by which a strong company culture is built. DEI practices are meant to enable equality of opportunity, to promote openness, and to fight bias and discrimination. However, DEI efforts are increasingly becoming part of a national political debate, more so and more so as we go on over these past couple years. I'm going to give you some statistics here. According to a recent survey, 56% of employed Americans say that focusing on increasing DEI efforts in the workplace is a good thing. 56% is good. However, that means that 44% aren't so sure. Opinions about DEI vary considerably, and of course it's along demographic and, to no surprise, political lines. Some are now scrutinizing traditional DEI efforts in the workplace, and answers sometimes are often complicated and not so easy. But here to help me have this conversation today is someone who I've been looking forward to talk to about this for quite some time, and it's Dr. Nika White. Dr. Nika White, she is an international authority on DEI. She is an author. She's written books. She knows it all. Nika, welcome.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me. I look forward to this conversation.
I have too. We've been talking about having this conversation for a while, and so thankfully now here we are at the desk, ready to talk business. Good to see you.
Ready to talk business. Thank you.
You're welcome. First, before we get into it all, I just want to talk about Nika for a second. So you've got another book. You've had 3 books.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so your third book came out not too long ago. And the way that I found that it came out is I'm looking through LinkedIn, and I see a post by my friend Nika, who is at Times Square in New York City. And Nika looks up at those huge electronic digital billboards, and she sees a picture of yourself and a picture of your book. Yeah. Bestseller, right?
Yes.
How about that?
That is correct.
Yeah.
So I am the author of 3 books. My most recent work is Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI. And it's published by Forbes Books. It was released at the end of January. So my book baby is a little over 6 months old now.
Book baby, I love it.
Yeah. And it's been really exciting to be a part of seeing people's reactions to the book. So I have really appreciated the support and the engagement. I just love having conversations with individuals about what they've learned, how they're processing it, what they've applied from the book.
Right.
But yeah.
An international expert. I don't often get to talk to international experts, but I am today. Nika, let's talk about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Tell me, what are its origins? I mean, how did DEI, that terminology, come into existence, and how is it in our workforce, our workplaces?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I appreciate being able to go back to the genesis, because DEI is not new in the United States at all. It has been around for quite some time. In fact, DEI first came on the scene during the 1960s around the civil rights movement. And it was a way for organizations to become much more intentional and smarter about how do they create these workplaces where people now are being integrated, right? So that everyone has an opportunity to succeed. It was also right on the heels of the employment laws that were passed during that time, including affirmative action. So organizations really needed a way to help the culture of the organization to be able to navigate what was new for everyone at that time, which was, of course, part of that integration.
Right. And this was early 60s. And as you pointed out, on the heels of the civil rights movement, of course, that hit its zenith in maybe the late 50s or so. And that's when DEI became a part of our lexicon, even though it did not, I think, become the part that it lives in today until, I don't want to say recently, because it's not recently, but is it fair to say over the last decade, 7, 8, 10 years?
Yes.
Is that fair to say?
That is completely fair. This body of work and this discipline has evolved tremendously over time. It now includes, and it has included, many other dimensions of diversity outside of just the racial piece. And so now we have to think about sexual orientation. We have to think about people with disabilities. Yeah. We have to also consider neurodiversity. So there's so many different dimensions of diversity that now people are paying attention to and making sure that they are adjusting their workplaces appropriately to make sure that everyone can thrive. And so it continues to evolve. I will say that the power of DEI really has garnered a lot of attention and additional support because of some really unfortunate circumstances that have taken place in our society. So one that's probably top of mind for so many people is the murder of George Floyd back in 2020. That is when there was this huge groundswell of support from organizations to feel inclined to be a bit more intentional about trying to really address and navigate what their brown and black employees were feeling in the workplace and how to really support them. And so DEI practitioners all over were inundated during that time. And so while it was good to be able to see a heightened level of awareness, what we found 3 years later is that a lot of the promises and the commitments that were made, they ring hollow. And there hasn't been tremendous amount of movement to the extent in which we were hoping.
Before we go further in that, let's just define it for a second. DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Tell me the difference between the three.
I'll be happy to. And this is an important question. So collectively, all three are value sets and really intentionality around creating spaces and places where people of all types of backgrounds and demographics can feel that they can thrive, right, and be successful. But let's talk about the distinction between them. Diversity is here and happening. There's nothing that we need to do to create diversity. It is really just a point of respect in which things differ. And when we think about it from a workplace perspective, it is the mix of all of those different types of people from different background, experiences, demographics, dwelling in that same environment. And so nothing that we need to do to create diversity. But when we think about inclusion, Rick, it is the opposite in the sense that it has everything to do with action, right? So we can't be passive about the work of inclusion. We have to be very intentional. We have to be calibrated, calculated, strategic. We have to have foresight to understand that the journey that we're on to create that inclusion is going to yield a reward. And so that's this distinction between diversity and inclusion.
Give me an example of inclusion.
Inclusion is, the example that comes to mind that so many people are aware of, I'll share, and this is actually referencing another DEI practitioner that I have great admiration for, Verne Myers. She actually just recently transitioned from being the Global Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Netflix when she runs her own consultancy. But she says that diversity is being invited to the party, right? So everyone gets an invitation, everyone. And then inclusion is once you're at the party, you're being invited to dance.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love it. I love it.
And I often extend that and I talk about it's not only being invited to dance, but maybe someone is also inviting you over to the beverage station or the refreshment station. They're asking you questions and really engaged in who you are, right? Perhaps they are introducing you to other individuals because they just think that much of you, right? Yeah. And so it certainly has a look and feel about it, right? Now,
so it's like the equivalent of being in high school, and we have all colors in high school, depending on your high school, of course. However, there are niches in high school, right?
Yes.
And sometimes you're not allowed in my niche.
Oh, exactly.
And I might not be allowed in yours. I mean,
absolutely.
That's the
insider, outsider, mentality is real. People experience it every single day. And so what you are describing is precisely just that. Yeah.
Right.
And then we get to the equity piece. This is the part, Rick, that I find that most people are challenged by, right? Is there's a lot of complexity around the equity piece. Oftentimes, it is used interchangeably with equality. And while they are interconnected, there is a very important distinction that has to be made. Equality is giving everyone the same thing. And the expectation is that giving everyone the same thing is going to yield success for everyone. The problem with that is that we all do not start at the same place, which means we all may have vastly different needs in order for us to be successful. And so if we are operating with a mindset of equity, a lens of equity, we are thinking very intently about what are the individual needs of the people that we want to be successful, right? And when you think about it from a workplace perspective, we don't hire people to our organizations to not be successful because their success is part of the team success, the department success, the organization success. And so we have to really be intentional to understand what are those needs, what are those gaps, and how do we bridge the gap, even if it means it could look different from person to person.
Let's talk about some examples. I mean, one that comes to mind immediately is tried and true harassment, right? But give me some specific examples, including examples that may exist today, but did not exist a few years ago.
So this question is important as well. When we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, why it has such an important role in our society, it is because there have been a series of issues that many people, particularly those who are part of marginalized communities, that have experienced from time to time that has not allowed them to show up authentically or to have full opportunity for success. And so you mentioned harassment. I also will add to the list the unconscious bias piece and the microaggressions. Some have probably heard of the statement, death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? There is nothing micro about microaggressions. In fact, they can be very macro. And when you think about the totality of all of those experiences adding up, it can create some serious issues for people within the workplace.
Tell me about microaggression.
Yeah, so microaggressions are very subtle. Sometimes you don't even know that it's happening.
Are we talking like passive aggressive?
Well, in some regards, but sometimes what makes it so tricky, Rick, is that the person who is on the receiving end of it, the victim, sometimes they don't even know that it's happening. And it's because they begin to interrogate what's taken place, and they'll ask themselves, will I be believed if I bring this up? Am I just being too sensitive?
Right.
And I think that what happens is when people start to harbor those thoughts, they'll end up just kind of letting it go and not saying anything.
And I would guess that these microaggressions are easier for the person who is doing them to deny, too, in some situation, right?
That's precisely where I was going
next. She
next.
thought that, or he thought that I meant. I didn't mean that.
Yes, exactly. Right? Are you sure you heard it that way?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Well,
this person jokes with everyone like that,
right.
And so it certainly undermines one's thoughts and opinions and experiences. And I think that it's really important for us to believe people when they come forth and they share information of microaggressions being a part of their experience in the workplace. But we have to provide a training to allow people to understand when it shows up, what it looks like, how to disrupt it, right? What's the impact of it to the entire organization? And microaggressions, they happen every single day.
I would think that it is way more difficult to manage these types of things today in today's workplace than it was several years ago. And I would think that it is getting more difficult and more difficult and more difficult as time goes past. Yeah. Yes?
Absolutely. It can be a very polarizing topic, although it shouldn't be. I often say that resistance is a lack of clarity. So what I believe as a practitioner in this space is that where we're going to be able to gain some ground around the divisiveness that exists right now around this topic of DEI is to continue to provide learning experiences where people can build up their awareness, their understanding. And that even means to learn, relearn, and unlearn misinformation that we've all been exposed to, right?
Unlearn.
Yes, absolutely. But it has evolved so much. And I think that we are finding that with some of the recent decisions that have been made, like I think about the Supreme Court decision, the ruling on affirmative action in higher learning institutions and other government, organizations, that is certainly having an impact on how in which people are navigating this work.
Yeah, I want to make sure that we understand where you're going with that. So it was the Supreme Court, and I don't know how long ago it's been now. It's probably been a few months.
Yeah, a few months.
But they ruled that colleges, and this came from a lawsuit that is involving Harvard and a few other colleges, but it's an umbrella type of decision. They ruled that colleges can no longer specifically take race into account as a basis for admission into a college. Now, opponents, and I just want to stick on this for a second, opponents of that ruling say that it is a monumental threat to racial equality, and proponents say that race should never have been a factor in making the decision on whether that person got into college in the first place, right? What do you think?
Well, those individuals are ill-informed. And I say that strictly because if you don't take our history into account, then your perspective is going to be that history no longer is valid and no longer has relevance to these types of decisions. And they absolutely do. And so while this decision has certainly impacted a lot of ways in which now higher learning institutions are governing themselves, right, to be compliant, it also is impacting the corporate world, the workplace, right? We get a lot of our talent from higher learning institutions. And if that is now where organizations are finding it appropriate to recruit from, then we have to ensure that those institutions are admitting students of diverse backgrounds, including those who are part of marginalized communities who have a history of being victims of systems of oppression and discrimination. And I'm glad to see that a lot of institutions are finding very creative ways to combat that because it shows forth their leadership and their ability to recognize the value of a diverse student body population.
I want to make sure I understand what you're saying and how you feel about it. So let me give you a specific example for you to respond to. And yes, you just mentioned that colleges are being creative about how they're going to handle this, and I think that bodes well. But a specific example. So let's say that we have a black man, a white woman, and an Asian man. Okay, and they only have room for one of them to get into Harvard. I'm only using Harvard because that's maybe the black man is not as qualified as the other two. However, in order to meet goals, Harvard or whatever college that is feel that they need to let him or her in, even though these other two may be more qualified. So just to make sure I understand, what are you saying is the reason that, oh, no, he should be the one you choose?
Yeah, I think we have to take a step back. And what I want to bring to the conversation is that what your example is at the moment of the decision making, right? Mm-hmm. I think that where a lot of organizations fall short is what are we doing well before the time of need to ensure that we're building up a diverse applicant pool of candidates across many different backgrounds. I always say, hire the best person for the job, appoint the best person for the job, but are you exercising rigor and due diligence with the strategies that have been laid out, because there's so many best practices to ensure a diverse applicant pool. And if you cannot answer that definitively, then there's still some work to be done.
But if you have a diverse applicant pool, and I just gave you an example of diversity sitting at the table, but we're going to choose one that may not be, as you said, hire the best person for the job.
Hire the best person for the job.
In this situation, admit the best person to college.
Yes, admit the best person to college, right. Absolutely. When we think about hiring the best person for the job, what I often see is that individuals will question whether or not diverse talent are qualified. I'll hear conversations like, let's make sure that we hire a qualified, diverse candidate. And it baffles me because when have we ever gone into a hiring situation thinking that we were going to hire somebody unqualified? And I think that needs to be challenged, and we need to have people to interrogate why they're asking that question. Why are they phrasing that? I believe that right now, when we are thinking about hiring diverse talent, we automatically maybe sometimes could assume that the quality of productivity and of intellect is not going to be there. And I want to challenge that assumption.
You know, when there was a time when we were talking about DEI measures that we were wanting to make sure that it included sexual orientation and, disabilities and religion and gender and all that kind of stuff. However, there's been something else that has been thrown into the mix over the last few years, and that is gender identification. That is something that we now have to take into consideration. Thoughts about that?
Well, I think that we have to recognize, as I mentioned early on when you asked about the distinction between diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity is not just about the optics of age, race, and gender. It is so much broader than that. And we, as a society, we have to become much more sophisticated in how in which we talk about and define diversity. So when we think about the LGBTQIA plus community, it's not just about sexual orientation and sexual preference. We have to think about the totality of what all those letters mean. And there is such a division around sometimes the LGBTQIA community. And what I think that people have to realize is that agreement does not always mean acceptance, right? I think that we can accept the difference and we can coexist without us leaving people in a position where they are not dignified. They're not treated with the sense of humanity and respect that they deserve, right? And so this is about a human rights type of conversation as well. And if we can get to a point where we're centering the humanity conversation, I truly believe that as a society, we'll be better off.
You mentioned the letters, and I think that it's the number of letters now that we deal with that is causing some of the pushback and the challenges. There was a time when it was a couple letters, and you just said a couple, and please excuse my ignorance, but I did not know the last two letters. LGBTQ.
IA plus. IA. Yes. So this is where the onus becomes really important at the individual level. What are we doing to educate ourselves?
Yes.
What are we doing to build up our cultural intelligence, our cultural humility? Because it is so easy to sit back and question and even to find fault in something that we don't understand. Change of any kind positions us in a negative, way. And so what are we doing? That's why I find it to be very appropriate when organizations are providing different types of learning experiences for people to get proximate to the lived experiences of those who are different from them. We have to stop classifying diversity or difference as right, wrong, good or bad, superior, inferior. It's just different, right? And I want us to get to that point where we can embrace that.
Good thoughts, Nika. I tell you, we still have several things that I want to talk about, but I want to take a commercial break before we get into the next conversation. I want to discuss, when we come back from and we're all going to be gone in 60 seconds. When we come back, I want to discuss the challenge to DEI efforts in the workplace that is related to what I'm going to call wokeism or an anti-woke movement. And that has become, that now goes hand in hand, unfortunately, with DEI efforts in the workforce and so in the workplace. And so we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to do it with Dr. Nika White as soon as we get back.
Thank you, Rick. My name is John Connell. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Burr and Forman in Greenville, South Carolina. Appreciate Rick bringing me on today to talk a little bit about some of the business legal issues that I commonly see. One of the issues that stands out to me and that I see a lot of employers of all sizes make are identifying and classifying all of their employees as independent contractors. The issues that we commonly see with independent contractors and employers identifying and classifying their employees as independent contractors is that you don't pay any payroll taxes and you don't have to pay workers' compensation issues. The problem arises when these employees are not properly paid, and specifically whether they're not properly paid with overtime benefits. So as you move forward, what I recommend you doing is when you bring on a new employee, look at how you're hiring this individual and whether they should be properly classified as an independent contractor or an employee. And specifically what you need to look at is whether the employee is doing a job for you and as part of the company. So is that individual in fact going and furthering for the benefit of the employer. If, as an example, an independent contractor on the flip side is someone that's really focused on doing something that is not related to the business. An example is bringing a plumber in to fix either some of your utilities. So of course, if you're not in the business of plumbing, you need to focus on, that can be an independent contractor. However, most individuals that you do retain, I do recommend that you bring them on as employees and that you properly provide them with offer letters at the beginning. And of course, we can always help on providing the certain specifications that you may need.
Welcome back, everyone, to Let's Talk Business South Carolina. I'm your host, Rick Jenkins, and I am joined today by Dr. Nika White. And she is the owner and founder and CEO of Nika White Consulting, and she is an international expert on DEI, and that's what we've been discussing for the last 15 or 20 minutes, and we're going to continue the conversation here for a little while longer. Nika, thanks.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
Yep, you're welcome. Okay, as I said, we've been having this conversation about DEI, again, diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace, and about how those efforts can impact a company culture. However, our culture has changed drastically over the last few years, and it continues to change. With the onset, I'm going to call them woke ideals or wokeism or some anti-woke pushback. And so, and I think everyone understands that, but this is a challenging conversation, and it's one that doesn't always have easy answers. And the answers sometimes are complicated. It's not always a black-white issue, no pun intended. It lives in the gray area sometimes, right? And so I want to explore that a little bit with you, Nika. But before we do, I want to talk about defining woke for a second, okay? And I want to tell a quick little story. And this is a story you may have heard or you may not. I did not know it until I was doing a little research for the conversation. Back in the late 1930s, there was a Black American folk singer, and his name was Hetty Ledbetter. Okay. First of all, Hetty is a wonderful first name, and Ledbetter is a wonderful second name, and you put them together, you have a magnificent name, okay? Hetty Ledbetter. But what is even better than being called Hetty Ledbetter is that he was known in the music industry as Leadbelly. So Hetty Ledbetter, also known as Leadbelly, used the term stay woke in a song that he wrote back in 1938. And this song, and I did some research. Now woke existed, the term woke existed long before this song, but in outside the United States. Yeah. But in America, this was one of the very first times that it was used. Now, so he wrote this song, and it was about 7 or 8 Black teenagers and young men who were falsely accused of raping 2 white women. And he wrote this song, and this happened in Scottsboro, Alabama. And he was being interviewed after the song came out and received some exposure. And this is his quote. He said, "I advise everybody to be a little careful when they go through Scottsboro. It's best to stay woke and keep your eyes open." Now, of course, what Leadbelly meant at that time was, let's be awake. Let's make sure that we understand the problems that are in our society that exist because of racial injustices. Stay awake, folks. Be aware. Now, that was 1938, and that was my good friend Leadbelly. What has happened, Nika, since 1938 when Leadbelly put this in a song, between then, what he meant then, and what it means today? What has happened?
People have been misinformed. And so when I think about being woke, it is simply just someone who is well informed about racial and social issues, right? And so the story that you told, I am familiar with it. And what kept coming up for me as you were sharing this story is eyes wide open, really. And that's what he was saying. Right. Make sure that your eyes are wide open when you're going through this environment, this place, because in its history, there have been examples of situations where people have been harmed. And so when we think about the racial issues that exist and the racial inequalities that exist and inequities that exist in our society today, it is important for people to be well informed and to do their part in helping to create greater parity around the differences between races. And so I I am saddened that wokeism has been weaponized to the point to where it is losing its power and it's creating great level of division. I feel like it's really misunderstood. And so I'm glad that we're having this conversation today, because hopefully it will bring some clarity to folks who have been maybe trying to stay away from conversations like this.
Right. Let's talk about that division. A USA Today poll came out, it wasn't too long ago, maybe a month or so ago, and the poll showed that Americans are divided on whether woke is a compliment or an insult. 60% of Republicans and 25% of Democrats actually say they feel it is an insult. And also within that survey, 56% of Americans say that what woke means to them is to be informed, educated on, and aware of social injustices, okay? But 39% say that in their opinion, woke means to be overly politically correct and to police others' words, feelings, actions, so forth and so on. Thoughts?
So when I think about the latter part of what you just shared, that definition, to me, what comes to mind is what also has been referred to as the council culture. Now, I am not a practitioner that believes in the council culture. I believe that we need everyone to arrive to this conversation and to this work because they see the value of it and they understand it. We are going to make mistakes. And so when people are called out, I think that it does create this tendency to want to stay on the sidelines or not engage or to be offended, right? And so, there's also this big phenomenon of helping people to understand how do we call in the behavior, which is a difference from calling a person out. So I wanted to make that distinction. I believe that those who are anti-woke has everything to do with a misunderstanding around what it means, and they probably are relating more to the council culture. I believe that in order for all of us to be able to live in a society that we deserve and where we all have opportunity for success, we're going to have to make sure that we're engaging people of all types, right? And so that is the reason that I tend to stray away from council culture type of activity.
I would say that proponents of the, again, lack of better phrasing, anti-woke movement would say that it is political correctness run amok. And that we've added too many letters, and that we've just gone to an extreme and we've taken it too far. I guess my question to you, and this is a tough one, Nika, my question is, can you see, understand, identify with that point that some of those people might feel?
Typically, from my experience, people who are against wokeness, it has everything to do with misunderstanding it or digging their heels in around a position of not wanting to understand. Willful ignorance, honestly, is how I refer to it. I do think there's a lot of misinformation out there that people have gravitated to, and it has shaped one's thoughts and perspectives. And again, part of being on this journey is learning, unlearning, relearning, and just being open to hearing different perspectives. Right. I think a lot of the accountability and responsibility is on the individual to want to unlearn the misinformation, to want to engage in data that helps them to be much more open to really what woke means.
For executives that are in the workplace and they are tasked with meeting DEI goals and making their workplace a more diverse, inclusive place to work, their jobs are tougher today than they were a few years ago. Advice for those folks?
Lean into it. Tough does not mean impossible. I think that from a DEI leader perspective, it's going to take really thinking innovatively around how we continue to navigate the minefield. There are a lot of champions and ambassadors. We have to find who those individuals are within the organizations and not feel like the voice behind this work is solely the responsibility of the person that carries that title. being inclusion-minded, being, having a lens of equity, that is all leadership, and not leadership by way of a title or position, but by way of influence. And when we think about it in that regard, we can influence no matter where we are within an organization. I would also say that it's critically important to align on what are those guardrails, right? That from a leadership perspective, we all can agree to be a part of how we want DEI to manifest in the organization. Without having those conversations, and I like to refer to them as readiness conversations, you're going to find yourselves, not necessarily aligned. And I think that alignment is so critical. The reason that I believe a lot of organizations were caught off guard by the Supreme Court's decision is because they were not fully aligned. They thought they were. They thought that everybody knew how DEI should look and feel within the organization. But then once they really started to get granular around it, there was some dissension there. So they needed to really bring that back into a place of commitment where everybody was really fully behind it. I also think that gathering data is really critical. I believe in evidence-based data to help inform decisions, right? And that requires us to get proximate to the lived experiences of people that are different from us. Where you sit within an organization, Rick, determines what you see. And what you see becomes your lens. And your lens, it certainly influences your decision-making. So who are we considering when we're making decisions that impact such a broad group of diverse people?
Nika, fantastic. Fantastic stuff. Folks, this is Dr. Nika White. She is the CEO and president, founder of Nika White Consulting, and an internationally renowned expert on DEI. That was a good conversation, a tough conversation in some regard, tough in the sense that it's just not easy. It's just not easy. And it's not going to get any easier. But I appreciate you helping me talk it out, and I enjoyed it, as always.
I did too, Rick, and thank you for bringing this conversation to your audience.
You are welcome. Folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be back with another guest. Don't go anywhere. Be right back.
Hey, Rick. For the financial tip of the week this week, we're going to be talking about living abroad and moving abroad permanently. Say you want to retire and live in a foreign country. There's some things you need to know. Number one, Medicare will not pay in a foreign country if you're there for an extended period. Number two, Social Security will deposit into a bank in a foreign country, but only in those countries that they designate as safe. Number three, long-term care policies don't necessarily pay in foreign countries. Check the policy to see what it says. And number four, what does it take to actually live in a foreign country? My wife and I are currently looking at this because we are going to move to France when we retire. Our beautiful daughter lives here in the south of France. We are in Nice. And we have to find out what it takes to get a long stay visa and to qualify to be part of their medical system in France. You need to find out the same thing no matter what country you're going to live in. Those are your financial tips of the week. Jeff Froman, Ameriprise Financial. Back to you, Rick.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Business. I am your host, Rick Jenkins, and I am glad that you are with us. It is time for our next guest, and our next guest is Matt Caldwell. Matt is the market president for Bon Secours Health System. Matt, he's been here since 2019, but I think everyone knows this, but Bon Secours, they are a not-for-profit Catholic health system. They were founded in 1983, and for those of you who don't know, and I didn't know it until I looked it up, but Bon Secours is French, and it means good health. Matt, welcome to the show.
Well, it's great to be here, and it's always fantastic to be able to represent St. Francis.
I'm sure it is, and I have been to that hospital many, many times, for family and everything. And I will say this, cafeteria is best hospital cafeteria food I've ever had in my life. I will say that. Chicken wings, can't beat them. Okay, Matt, I want to talk about you for a minute before we get into business. Man, you have been everywhere, right? We were talking a little bit before we came on the show, but you were, you started in this industry in nursing, and you got a degree in Kansas. Did you tell me you were born in Florida?
Born in Florida, lived all over the South, got a degree in nursing in Kansas.
Right.
Did actually worked at a nursing home when I was in high school in Oklahoma. And
oh, my goodness.
After I graduated in Kansas, worked in Oklahoma for a while. Then I worked in Texas and got my master's in healthcare administration at the University of Texas at Arlington.
and you were in Tennessee for a while, you went to Ohio for a while, and then all of a sudden in 2019, you find yourself in this place called Greenville, South Carolina.
Yeah.
My goodness. So let me ask you this. You were in Texas for quite a while, right? I mean,
Right.
how many years?
15 years.
15 years in Texas, Dallas.
Dallas, and on the border for 5.
Exactly. Okay. So tell me, what is the difference between Dallas, Texas, and Greenville, South Carolina?
Well, I didn't get to see them. I didn't get to see the mountains every day going to work.
Right.
So that's one big difference. But there's a lot of similarities.
Really?
Between the people of, I would say, even Tennessee, South Carolina, and Texas. A lot of kind of very similar. We're all in that Bible Belt, very faith-based, good people. And I think you see that now with the influx of people from around the country going into Texas or coming into South Carolina or going into Tennessee.
You got that Southern charm in Texas as well?
They have a Southern charm. They got some good food in Texas, a lot of unique places in Texas. And of course, being there that long, and both of my boys being born there, you have to be a Cowboys fan. A little bit tough after this last game, but we'll bounce back.
Right. So still a Cowboy fan. Now you've been here long enough. Have you chosen yet between Clemson or South Carolina?
Well, I've chosen Clemson.
Be careful.
Yeah, I know it's got to be careful there. I would say I am Clemson affiliated through tuition. My son is doing his first year there, and he actually won his first game. He's a hockey goalie. Won that this last Sunday.
Well, no one can argue with you being affiliated through tuition. You gotta root for the Tigers if your pocketbook is involved. All right, Mark, let's talk, let's talk business. And let's talk about remote care.
Okay.
Let's start right there. Now, in March of 2020, this thing called COVID occurred, and it changed the way a lot of industries were doing business. Now, in the healthcare industry, we were already kind of going down that road with telehealth,
right,
remote care. We were going down that road, but I believe we sped up a little bit once March 2020 hit, yes?
Yeah, it really is unique. It's been cyclical over the years in healthcare, and I think you've seen it, even if you start way back prior to the wars, there's always been a push for getting health as close to home as you can.
Yeah. Right.
And we've seen that through that. When we had home health in the 80s, you see that cyclical with infusion care. And then when COVID hit, we really saw the push through technology to try to get at least primary care visits, if possible, done through a tablet or through a computer or a device. And that does have significant advantages, but it also our technology still hasn't caught up with being able to really assess a patient. And I think that's still where we're working on, the ability to assess a patient from head to foot. And so our physicians are great, and they continue to use the tools that are available for them, but there's still nothing like being able to see a patient across from them and assess them.
Do you have any feel for what percent of the patients are falling into that telehealth circumstance?
Yeah, during COVID, our numbers went up drastically, like I'm sure everybody's did. And it's fallen back now below 10%.
Okay.
And what I would say is there is a segment, and it's not necessarily the segment that you would think. It's really kind of barbell shape, if you would think about it. Really young, active individuals that are really kind of comfortable with using technology will access that. And you will see people jumping into that field, even like we've heard this week, Costco trying to jump into primary care. We've heard Amazon trying to jump in at varied success levels. And so those that just need to get, hey, I'm got a stuffy nose, not feeling well. But you also are starting to see that with some of the elderly population because of their ability to ambulate or to get into a doctor's office, that they're accessing a primary care physician or maybe a specialist through some kind of telehealth.
Look into your crystal ball a little bit, and what do you foresee, 10 years down the road? I mean, where's telehealth going to wind up?
Well, there's a big push now to have hospital at home, and you'll hear that kind of term thrown around, and there's been some capital investment, private equity investment into that, where they're really trying to get technology at the bedside and then having providers, whether that be nursing or physicians, being able to monitor that health at home. And so I guess if I had a crystal ball, there would be some kind of ability to monitor a patient that needed what I would call basic diagnosis. Maybe they had congestive heart failure or COPD. While those are not basic in the nature, sometimes the treatment of them are pretty regimented. And so you can kind of look at that through that crystal ball, if you will, to say, can a provider observe, assess, and treat a patient with extensions of nursing or therapy or what have you? Right. I think inside that crystal ball, though, as well, I don't think that there's so much capital intensity inside of hospitals that we will always need ICUs. And I think as the years have passed and as my career has passed, hospitals have become more acute. And I think that's what we're seeing today. People that come in now are much sicker. They have to be much sicker when they are admitted. And the treatments that we do, especially during the pandemic, the intensity of those treatments have gone through the roof.
Let's change gears a little bit and talk about staffing shortages. It is a trend that has plagued somewhat the medical industry for some time now. Of course, it was exacerbated by what happened with COVID back in 2020, but it continues to be a little bit of a roller coaster, as I understand it. Tell me where you guys stand with getting good folks in.
Well, it's interesting. Prior to the pandemic, we call them agency, and so that term is a little bit of a broad term, but an agency would be somebody you go out and hire for just a certain amount of time, and then you release them. So they're not a full-time employee or even a part-time employee. And before the pandemic, we didn't have any. We didn't have any in the whole system. We have about 3,500 FTEs, about 5,000 people that work for Secours St. Francis. We didn't have any. When the pandemic hit, for various reasons, either people contracting COVID or people traveling out or people not traveling, we had a spike, as well as every other hospital that I know had a spike in getting agency to come in, help us through those times. And it was really crucial. I think, so I'll take it in two sections. The first section I'll say is everybody non-provider, so non-physician. So we recruited those agency and we had them come in. Where we stand at today is we are much better. We are almost at pre-pandemic levels. There is a draw to St. Francis that employees have. It's nothing to see when you walk down the hall, people that have worked there for 25, 30, 35, 40 years. I even have them in my office that have worked that long because there's a draw to the mission. And so I think we're starting to trend back that way. When it comes to providers, the same thing happened. A lot of providers kind of sheltered in place, and it was tough to recruit primary care and some specialists through the pandemic. We're starting to see that ease up some. The northern part of South Carolina is easy to recruit to because it's so beautiful and growing so fast. And we are hiring, almost every day we have some recruit in looking for a place, whether it be a specialist or a primary care. And so hopefully we can continue that trend, but it is tough around the states. And we've seen, I will throw in this last comment, hospitals are struggling. During the pandemic, there was a hospital around the U.S. closing about once every 4 or 5 weeks. They were just closing. And we've even seen that close to here. We saw the hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, Atlanta Medical Center close because of, there was a whole lot of things around that, but I'm sure finances were part of it. And so it's a very tough business to be in, but fortunately we have a very, very good hospital system in the upstate and very fortunate to be a part of Bon Secours Mercy Health.
You got a new ambulatory surgery center.
Yes, we have one coming up. That's true.
Hasn't opened yet.
Opens up in the first, hopefully the first week of April.
Yeah.
It will have 6 beds. It'll be on by our cancer center over in Malden, kind of by CUI car, which I'm sure a lot of your people know where that's at. It really is groundbreaking, and I use that term a little bit loosely because it is a partnership with some orthopedic doctors and with some ENT doctors and pain doctors. They partner with us, and we have a group named Compass that manages it. And we really are trying to get the treatment of high quality, which we have a fantastic set of orthopedics, ENT, and pain doctors, and lower cost to the patient on an ambulatory setting. That's the whole idea behind it. So when it opens up in April, it should be lower cost for our patients. It's all day surgery, and we have some fantastic robotics that will be in there as well. And it's going to be an exciting time for the upstate.
Tell me about the robotics.
So it's interesting. We've had robotics, general surgery robotics, for years, much as our competitors as well have had Da Vinci. But we were the first to come in with orthopedic robot. And what that is called Makoplasty. That's the first one we had, called Mako. And what they did is they would take imaging and apply inside of an arm, a robotic arm, with a physician at the bedside always overseeing this. And the idea was to have a bone, we call it bone sparing. So it doesn't carve away more bone than it needs. And then the second thing, maybe more importantly, it creates a better fit. And so when you go in to have a knee, and we will soon have hip, when you go in to have a knee, there is a better fit for people going in there. When I started my nursing career in orthopedics, somebody would come in to have a total knee. They would be in there one day, and they may be discharged in 3 or 4 or 5 days. Now you can walk in the morning and walk out in the afternoon with a new knee. That's kind of the technology that has been introduced even in my short career. And so we're excited about presenting that in that ambulatory surgery center as well.
Technology today, huh?
It is fantastic.
I can't fathom it. I just can't fathom it.
It really is neat. And it's so exciting to see patients who have come in with struggle with some kind of arthritis or some kind of issue with a knee to have a new knee and then walk out in the afternoon. Now, they still will do therapy, but it's just fantastic ability.
You've got a new medical campus.
We do. We have a new medical campus in Simpsonville. We opened up a freestanding emergency department April of last year. And so we've been about a year and a half we've been open. And it really has done well for the residents of the Simpsonville, Fountain Inn, kind of that area. And we really wanted to bring the quality that Bon Secours has been known for 90 years into the Simpsonville campus. We didn't realize when we put it in there how fast that area is growing. Yeah. We thought we knew, we didn't know. Right. And it is just exploding down there. And it is doing great, and the satisfaction from the patients is top notch.
Yeah, I live down close to it, and I drive past it every time I go to Lowe's, which is it's next door neighbor, and it's a beautiful campus and a new spot there. You've also acquired some urgent care centers. We have. We had an arrangement, what we called AFC Urgent Care, and we had 8 of them in the upstate. There was another kind of branch of AFC that had 7 of them, and we acquired those 7. So we own all of the AFC Urgent Care in the upstate right now, and we'll have 3 more open before the end of the year. And they really are all over the place. As far south as Greenwood, far north is Boiling Springs, and soon to be Duncan, and we have them all over Greenville County as well. And what that's done is it's kind of fit a need for what I would consider primary care. Some patients need to see a physician or a provider, not emergently, but urgently, and that's what's fit that need. There is tremendous volume goes through there. We will probably see north of 200,000 people that will use those urgent cares, especially as we go into the winter months, because they want to go in, hey, do I have the flu or do I have COVID? Is this an emergent case that I need? And it's interesting because people are getting so smart and utilizing technology and accessing the appropriate access point. And that's what it's there for. Let's keep it with technology for a second. I'm going to get you out of here on this. Artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, it's rearing its head in almost every industry that there is. Yes, it is. And it's amazing. And the healthcare industry is no exception to that, of course. You got robots doing surgeries. What about artificial intelligence?
Yeah, AI is leaning in on healthcare as well. Some of that we've already done with Viz AI is already coming in. It helps us with stroke determination. Yeah. We see it through teleradiology as well. But it's interesting as AI leans in. I even read it today in one of our healthcare publicities, that it's helping decipher what's an outpatient and what's an inpatient. Some of it's helping decipher with pathology reads, or with radiology reads. I think the advent of that will continue. The issue is AI right now is as good as information as you put into it. You'll get that out. Unfortunately, some of our patients, and I'm sure over time, they may not tell quite the whole story about what's going on. And that's why our providers are so important, because for them to truly assess that patient, somebody come in and say, hey, I've got shoulder pain. And really what they need to tell you is they got chest pain. And so we continue to lean on our providers. We will use AI as a tool. We need to. It needs to be a part of that, but we need to use it smartly and as we march forward.
Matt, good stuff, man.
Yes, sir.
All kinds of good stuff happening at Bon Secours Health System. This is Matt Caldwell. He is the market president for the Greenville market for Bon Secours. Folks, that concludes another episode of Let's Talk Business. I'm glad you joined us. We'll be back next week, and you can always get us on YouTube or on any of the podcast platforms. We'll see you next time.